Welcome to My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 580. This program is in loving memory of Miriam Bas Elio Altes, Allah HaShalom, and in merit of Baruch ben Yomen ben Menucha Lana Altes, Yukasil ben Leah Rochel and Rochel Bas Liba Farkash, dedicated by Pinchas Todres ben Miriam and Sarah Bas Rochel Altes. Well, we are Chof Beis Shevat, literally tonight and tomorrow, going into Chof Beis Shevat, the yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke. The Rebbe's Rebbetzin passed away on Chof Beis Shevat, Tovshim Mem Ches, so that would make it 38 years ago. So, of course, we'll begin speaking about that, and then we'll also talk about this week's parsha and some other timely questions that have come in. Good opportunity now to announce, for those that are not familiar, welcoming all those new listeners, to chassidusapply.com is the website where all the My Life programs, going back all the archives, now we're talking about 579 earlier programs that are all stored there, as well as a forum where you could ask any question. Nothing's taboo, nothing's off limits, completely anonymously, as well as other resources, Hasidic resources. Please take advantage of it. Today with our AI as well, SimonJacobson.ai, you can ask any question and it taps into all those resources, and people have spoken very highly of its accuracy. So please take advantage of that as well. With that said, so let's go right into Chof Beis Shevat. As always, it's always good to begin with what is Chof Beis Shevat? What is the practical significance of this day to each one of us? Because besides, obviously, the history comes down to what does it mean to us? What lessons do we learn? What action should it elicit from us? So, let's begin with the history. As somebody writes, can you share a short biography and some stories about the Rebbetzin? But we'll begin with the history. So, it's 38 years ago. I remember it very vividly, like today. Tovshim Mem Ches. And it was a very sad day. The Rebbe, as he said later in the Shiva, this was Eshes Nurim, meaning a wife, a young wife from young age. The Gemara talks specifically about the grief, the strongest grief possible when you're dealing with someone who you've been with for the entire life, practically. So the Rebbetzin passed away. There was the Levaya. And I have to say, just on a very basic level, in many ways things changed dramatically in so many of the things, the Rebbe's functions. He moved his entire operation that year to his house from 770, would only come for Shabbos, Farbrengen every Shabbos. He edited all those Farbrengens, actually. And every Farbrengen literally mentioned, V'chayit na libei, the living shall take to heart. The Rebbe's davened 3 times a day for the Rebbetzin in his home. And in every possible way, you could see the Rebbe wanted to demonstrate the effect that it had on him. As I said, besides moving his whole operation, and the Farbrengens that were always mentioning, V'achayit na libi, the living shall take the heart, Farbrengens actually changed. After Pesach that year, the Rebbe began to shorten the Farbrengen, which used to go to 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock at times. Farbrengens went till 3 o'clock, 3:15 max. During that summer, the Rebbe stopped, or after Pesach, I should say, the custom that he himself instituted every Shabbos. He would explain a Rashi, something from the Zohar, explanation of his father on the Zohar, Pirkei Avos in the summer, the months after Pesach, Rambam, all that stopped. And Moriah Chassidus, which was always the hallmark of a Rebbe, the Rebbe stopped saying Moriah We don't know exactly, but basically around Chukas, that summer of Tavshin Mem Ches, we actually asked the Rebbe, because when we published that year the Maamorim in a volume, so we had, based on our understanding, it seemed like that was the last time the Rebbe said in a consistent way Maamorim. The Rebbe did say the next year in Tavshin Mem Tes 2 Maamorim from the Bima before Pesach and before Shavuos, but in a consistent way it seemed to have stopped. So we asked the Rebbe didn't answer, he just left it, and that's when the Maamorim stopped officially. We'll never know exactly all the reasoning behind it, but it was clearly the impact of the Rebbetzin. We find by the Tzemach Tzedek a similar, that he was deeply impacted when the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka of the Tzemach Tzedek also had the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, and both preceded. There was the only 2 cases where the Rebbetzins outlived the Rebbe Rabbeim. That also had affected the Tzemach Tzedek deeply. They say that the Rebbe asked Rabbi Pekarsky then, the Rav, a question which is quite shocking actually. He asked the Rav, does a son-in-law still have a connection to his father-in-law after his wife passes away? Essentially questioning his connection to the Frierdiker Rebbe, because that's how it officially became Rebbe, was the son-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe. And now that the Rebbe Chaim Mushka, the daughter of the Frierdiker Rebbe, has passed away, so Rabbi Pekarsky wisely said, absolutely not even a question. But the mere fact that the Rebbe asked that. So it is reminiscent of what happened by the Tzemach Tzedek, where the Tzemach Tzedek literally stopped saying Maamorim, stopped Yechidus, to the point that Chassidim came to the Tzemach Tzedek and said, Rebbe. And the Rebbe answered, Ei melech b'lei matranisa, said the Tzemach Tzedek. A king is not a king without his queen. So they said, but Torah is called the queen, matranisa. The Tzemach Tzedek didn't accept that. Obviously, Tzemach Tzedek at some point did continue saying Maamorim. But it just shows you the impact. So when we talk about the significance, what is the practical significance of this day to each of us, that just demonstrates the connection that the Rebbe had with the Rebbetzin, and how the Rebbe's very naaseh and leadership, however you explain it, was impacted by it. Obviously, not Chas v'Shalom, God forbid, that the Rebbe's leadership in any way was weakened, but still impacted. And of course, we know the Rebbe's words that he said, and Yud Kislev, which is the anniversary of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, in the Rebbe said the 25th anniversary, which was in Tavshin Yud. They were married Tafresh Peites, Tavshin Yud. So the Rebbe said that this is the day that bound me to you and you to me, his marriage to the Rebbetzin. Why is that the day? Because that's the day when the Rebbe officially became the son-in-law of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and essentially his Mamal Mokim ultimately in Tavshin Yud. So you can imagine if this is the day that bound us, and the Rebbe continued, he said, we'll wear down the Golos. And the Eibishter should help that we should see paid as fruits from our work. So if that's the day that connection was made, so obviously Chof Beis Shevat, the Rebbe must have seen, and this is speculation, that her istalkus as some form of affecting that connection. Because the Rebbe's hope was, no question, that the Rebbetzin and the Rebbe would march and lead us into the Gula Mitzvahs Vashlem without any hefsek, without any interruptions. So again, it doesn't matter how we explain it. The point is, it's a significant day. And we know the yahrzeit of a tzaddik, a tzidkonis, is a day, as the Alter Rebbe explains in Ageres HaKedesh, that connects them with their students, with their children, who the students are children, especially in the case of the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, did not have biological children. And it's a day when all the Aved of the person elevates above and is drawn down below. Peil Yeshua is B'kerev Ha'aretz. And it affects redemption, salvations, B'kerev Ha'aretz, in the depths of this earth, meaning even in the lowest levels. So with that, we have the significance that a day where a total partner, the Tzelem Elokim, Zocher Nekeva Bara Esam, a Rebbe and a Rebbetzin, Melech and Matranisa, the king and the queen, Zoh and Malchus in its root, Natzilus. So we know about the Yichud of Zoh and Malchus, the Yichud of Melech and Matranisa. Kutchebrichu and Knesset Yisro, as it is in its root, is the key to the resting of the Shechina in this world. So a tzaddik and a tzidkonius are together. And when there's a histalkus, it affects every one of us who are mekablim, recipients from the naaseh of the generation. So of course the Rebbe continued his work and so on. But however the Rebbetzin was part of it through all the years, in some way there was a shift. Now obviously we know that tzaddikim gam b'chayim, gam b'misosam kruim chayim, that tzaddikim even in their, after their passing they're called alive, ma'azari b'chayim, afu b'chayim. But still, as long as it's not begashmius mamish, until tchias hamesim, there's something that indicates that the chet tzadas is still affecting us. There's still some form of helam. As Rabbi Hillel Parsha said, the time when the Tzemach Tzedek was, after the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka of the Tzemach Tzedek passed away, and there were chassidim that wondered what's going on with the Tzemach Tzedek. I might as well share the full story, it's very relevant. So after a few months, we don't know exactly the amount of time, but the Tzemach Tzedek announced he's going to say a Maimach Chassidus after months that he didn't, because of the Rebbetzins passing. So you can imagine the simcha by the chassidim, they all gathered in Lubavitch. Rabbi Hillel Paritch was already an older man. So we're talking about the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka passed away in Tofresh Chof Aleph, 5 years before the Tzemach Tzedek, Tofresh Chavov. Rabbi Hillel would pass away in Tofresh Chav Daled, but he was an older man. He was not well, but he came to Lubavitch, a mimer of the Rebbe, especially after all that had happened. And they were waiting and waiting in the place where the Tzemach Tzedek was expected to say the mimer, and he didn't come out, the Tzemach Tzedek. So Rabbi Hillel was not feeling well, so he had to go out. As he's walking out, he hears two young chassidim speaking, and they said something that the Tzemach Tzedek felt was not respectful. No, I'm sorry, Rabbi Hillel felt was not respectful, they said about the Tzemach Tzedek. So suddenly he had a surge of chayis, of energy. He went over to this younger light, and he said, Shvenselach, Shvenselach, Shvenselach. How do you translate Shvenselach? You could translate it any way you like. It means idiots, idiots, idiots. There's more sharper ways to translate it, but I'll just translate it like that. He says, Was meint ihr? A Rebbe is eigen anoz mit hamoil. A Rebbe is a lakus. Und bei Hashras is da a helem af a lakus, is da a helem af a Rebbe. He said, what do you think? Shvenselach, Shvenselach. Idiots, idiots, idiots. What do you think? A Rebbe's eyes, nose, and a mouth? A Rebbe is godliness. And when there's a concealment on godliness, there's a concealment on the Rebbe. So some way the stalkus of the Rebbetzin was a helem and elikus. Because every stalkus is a form of a helem. With all the milas in it. So the cause is a helem on the Rebbe. But we know every helem is b'shvil hagilui. And as the Rebbe said then that entire year and after that anything like that has to lead us to increase v'achayit na libe, increase our commitment to the cause that the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin stood for, which is Yefutza Meinasecha Chutza. And especially being the Rebbetzin, everything the Rebbetzin, a woman, the woman's role in that, in building a home. As the Rebbe said in a very beautiful Sikha, Tovshinun Beis, a few years later in the yard site. It was when the Rebbe gave out the Kuntras, Chof Beis Shevat, which I had the schus to prepare, the lavender cover, gave it out with a $5 bill to everyone. So the Rebbe said then that Chaya Mushka, her name, represents the role of what a woman's role is in Dira B'Tachtenim. She builds the home, but a home can be built. The basics are there. You have a shelter, a roof over your head. But Chaya is the vitality. Mushka is connected to muska, to a perfume, to a beautiful aroma. That the Eibishter wants a Dira, no, not just a home B'Tachtenim, a beautiful home. And who creates the beauty and all the energy? That's what the woman does. So essentially the lesson, the significance of this day to each one of us is the connection we have to the Rebbe, is to the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin together. Even the Rebbetzin, Kfuda Bas Melech Prima, behind the scenes, more discreet, humble, and so on. But it's there. And we recognize it in Tavshem Mem Ches. Till then, you didn't see the Rebbetzin that much. But you saw from the void, v'nifkadato ki yipokod meshavecha. We remember someone when we see the seat is empty. And we saw it how the Rebbe affected the Rebbe. So you can imagine the strength. But every helam is b'shvil hagili, tzimtzum b'shvil hagili. If there's a concealment, it means that we have to increase even more. And that's what the Rebbe did. That very year, a month later, Chof Beis Shevat, comes Chof Adar. That's her birthday. And that's when the Rebbe formally instituted the idea of Mivtza Yom Haledas. That people should celebrate a Yom Haledas with a whole list of suggestions what to do on the Yom Haledas. On her Yom Haledas, which according to one opinion is also the Yom Haledas of the world, creation of the world, B'Chof Adar Nivra Elam. And many, many other things that Rebbe established, Keren Chomesh then, and things connected all to the spirit and the soul of the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushke. So the significance to us is giving us the strength on this day to pearl Yeshua's Bekerev Haaretz in the spirit of the Rebbetzin, and especially for Neshei B'nai Yisrael, for the women and the girls of this generation, the righteous women and girls of this generation, in whose merit Mashiach will come, and to increase in everything, especially in the three mitzvahs that are connected to women, the Rosh Tevis of Chana, Chala Nida Adlokas Neres. But in general, as I said, in building a Dira B'Tachtenim with the emotion and with the nurturing elements that specifically a woman has, even more than a man. I remember talking about Telem, the Shloshim of the Rebbetzin, talking about stories and so on. We'll get to the biography in a few minutes. It was, the Shloshim of the Rebbetzin was Parsha Kesisa. It was Parsha Porah. Parsha Porah is the Parsha about death. Zois Chukas HaTeirah is the Parsha where we read about the Porah Aduma, the red heifer, that comes to be Matayir, to purify from the impurity of death. And the Rebbe spoke about it, and he brought the Medrash. Why does it say Zois Chukas HaTeirah? Wherever it says Zois, means Marabetz Boy V'Emer Zeh. It says Zois means God had to specifically, it was a difficulty that Moshe experienced, and the Eibishter had to point and say, this is how you do it, because Moshe needed even more clarity and more direction and more strength. What was the difficulty here? The Eibishter was showing Moshe Rabbeinu all the ways to purify from different types of, we'll call it spiritual toxins, spiritual impurities. Tumah. Tumah is a spiritual impurity, meaning a spiritual disconnect. How do you purify from that? How do you cleanse? How do you heal from that? Tumah Zov, Tumah Nida, Tumah Mitzera. There are many different impurities the Torah talks about. Then it came to Tumah Mes. Here suddenly Moshe Niskarkam upon him Shalmesh. Moshe's face became ashen. Niskarkam was sometimes interpreted, it became yellow, greenish, pale. But it's definitely something disturbed Moshe terribly. And he said, how will we ever purify from the impurity of Tumas Misa? The impurity, the toxins, the disconnect of death. And that's when Hashem said, Zois Chukas HaTeirah, let me show you. And he showed in the Porah Aduma, which itself needs a discussion why Porah Aduma, but Chassidus talks about the Mayim and the Offer, the Efer, basically Chesed and Gvura, Mayim and Eish. That is the vitality, Rotzi V'Shuv of life. But the question that Rebbe asked is, what bothered Moshe Rabbeinu? The Eibishter takes and he gives. And he gives and he takes. Just like, yes, there can be death and the impurity of death. The Eibishter can give a tikkun. Moshe was disturbed. It's Hashem here. Hashem showed him how to purify from all impurities. What suddenly by Misa was he so disturbed? And the Rebbe said these words. Moshe Rabbeinu knew all the biyurim. He learned Chassidus. It was clear that Rebbe was talking about himself. And he understood Yeridit Tzedek Aliyah, that every descent is an Aliyah even after a passing. And there'll be Tchias HaMesim. And the Neshama is Nitzchiyas. It's eternal. And yet he was disturbed. And the Rebbe essentially said, because as masters the mind can understand, and Moshe had of course a mind, Chochmah del Etzilus, a mind cannot explain and speak to a broken heart, to a bleeding heart. Moshe was not talking academically. He took it personally. Even one regel, kot nazavticha. Because anything that's godly is eternal. Even if there's a hefsek and one small pause between body and soul, between a divine soul and a body, disturbed Moshe terribly. How can you heal from that? Yes, I understand there'll be tchis hamesim in the future. And that's what bothered him. It was very clear that Rebbe was expressing that all the explanations, there's still something is wrong, something is off. I always wondered, why did the Rebbe feel the need to share that with us? It's one thing he's feeling that way, but he shared it with us. You could see he was talking about himself. You could see the grief, the pain. And the Rebbe was extremely discreet and private. When it came to his mother's passing in Tavshin Chof Hey, Vav Tishrei, though of course the Rebbe cried and he sat shiva, but it was far more discreet. People didn't see it quite. Here the Rebbe, the exact opposite. In every possible way, he demonstrated his feelings. So on a personal note, the only answer I have is when my father passed away 20 years ago, and I sat shiva, I suddenly came to the answer. The Rebbe was saying, I'm not just with you in times of celebration. Even when there's a ptira, when there's a passing, even in the sad moments, I'm with you. A Rebbe is with us. And the Rebbe was demonstrating, he wanted to show that. Adrabah, to give us strength. Not chaz v'sholem, just to reflect vulnerability, to give strength. So when it comes to Chof Beis Shevat, yes, on one hand, there's that sadness, now especially after Gimel Tammuz. But as I said, the end story is the key. It's to give us strength to be able to take this and transform it into something positive, even stronger than before. Because that's how we work. That's how Yidden are. That's how the Rebbe taught us to be. So I know it's many years, and for many people, no, I'm not saying we have to cry in Chof Beis Shevat. But we have to look at the Hazerim B'dima, B'rinu Yoktzeiru, to take whatever sadness it is, and whatever it reminds us, that ultimately it's the end of a tkufa, like the Rebbe explained in that Sikha Chof Beis Shevat, Tov Shenun Beis, that it was tkufas, the tkufa of Yud Shvat, there's Chof Beis Shevat, twice Yud Aleph, the different stages. And ultimately, we will be reunited, and we will be reconnected, but all the negative will have been transformed to positive. And that's when Chof Beis Shevat, to answer what is the practical significance, it's a day of connecting to the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin as one, of everything they represent, the Deir HaShvi, and to do more work than ever before. Like the Rebbe said, Chof Ches Nissen, tut alles was ihr kennt, do everything you can. And this just gives us even more strength to do that. Okay. Can you share a short biography and some stories about the Rebbetzin? So I shared a little. We'll talk a little more now. Talk about the biography. The Rebbetzin was born Chafei Oder, Tov Reish Samach Aleph. It's actually a year before the Rebbe. A little more than a year and a month. In the city of Babinovich, which is Belarus. It was not in Lubavitch itself, in the city of Babinovich. The second daughter of the Rebbe, of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the Rebbetzin Medina. And of course she grew up in Lubavitch. The middle of three daughters. And in the year Tofresh Peites, Yudal Kislev, as I mentioned, in Warsaw and Varsha, they got married, the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin. And ever since we're together. Afterwards they went to Berlin for several years, then afterwards to France, and finally came to the United States in Tov Shin Aleph, Chof Ches Sivan, 1941. And they lived here. Until, of course, Chof Beis Shevat, Tov Shin Mem Ches. The Rebbetzin passed away. The Rebbetzin was very discreet, very private. I had met the Rebbetzin myself several times, because I went to the house, the Rebbetzin house, my grandparents had sent me to bring shalach monas. A few times that I went there. Every time, the Rebbetzins face, I remember, was like almost transparent. It was so white and so brilliant. It was like shining light. You say kosnos oir, of oir with an aleph. It wasn't like skin. You saw like a certain light, an aura. Extremely edel. I remember a few times she asked me what my name was. Every time I went there, she said, "Wie heißt it?" I used to say, the Tata. I said, Gershon Ber Jakobson. Oh, sagt der Tata, sich gelehnt sein Artikel. My father was the writer, the first Tag Morgen Journal, later Allgemeine Journal. Museer Anochi gehabt. Tell him I read his article and I had much joy, much pleasure. I enjoyed it. Once she even told me, said, tell him that ich und der Mann, me and my husband both read it and we enjoyed it. Always a compliment. She always gave the biggest tip, which was one of my reasons I wanted to go, $5. Most people gave $1. Just a personal anecdote. One story I'd like to share that I've shared in the past, I heard from my good friend Olav Ashalom, Yosef Yitzchok Tevel. So the year was approximately 1965. He was probably 7, 8 years old. The Rebbetzin came, it was in the summer. The Rebbetzin drove up to 770, and she was coming to see her mother. Her mother, the Rebbetzin of Chamadin, who lived on the second floor of the Frierdiker Rebbe's apartment in 770. She was carrying bags. She apparently went shopping. So all the Bochum, they dispersed everywhere. He went over. I said to the Rebbetzin that he was happy to help her carry the bags. She gave him one of the shopping bags. They went up the steps, came to the elevator right in the 770 upstairs, where the Rebbe would stand and give dollars later years. As she came to the elevator, she notices that he has a cast on his arm. He had broken his arm. He had a white cast of plaster. She said, "Zayt sich nicht matriach." She said, "You don't have to bother." But he insisted. He went up in the elevator with the Rebbetzin. The Rebbetzin told him to wait outside of the door. She came back a minute later with a big chocolate. You know, those chocolates with the coin chocolates, like a tube of the round chocolates. Like, well, you give her shalach monas and stuff like that. He told me he had chutzpah, so he tells the Rebbetzin, I'll say it in Yiddish and then translate. He says to the Rebbetzin, Mestame weißt du nicht, als ich komme von achsidischer Mishpatim. Und uns hat man aufgehört wird, aber als man tut a Teva Iden, aber speziell der Rebbetzin, nimmt nicht genau so. Rebbetzin, you probably don't know, I come from a Hasidic family. And they taught us, they educated us, that when you do a favor for a Jew, especially the Rebbetzin, you don't take payment. Basically, he didn't want to take the chocolate. He said the Rebbetzin gave him a smile from ear to ear and said to him, Dacht sich mir, dass ich komme von achsidischer Mishpatim. I assume, or I presume, I think I also come from a Hasidic family. Remember, the Rebbetzin is only the wife, the daughter, the granddaughter, the great-granddaughter, all the way to all Rabbeim. So dacht sich mir, I think I also come from a Hasidic family. And uns hat man aufgehört wird, aber schas mir geht, nimmt man und befragt a guten Chocolate. I think I also come from a Hasidic family. And they taught us that when you're given something, you take it, especially if it's a good chocolate. So he took the chocolate, he enjoyed it, shared it with his friends. Seems like a simple line, but think about it. It reminded me immediately of the story with her great-grandfather, Tzemach Tzedek. Tzemach Tzedek, as we know, the Alter Rebbe gave special attention to him, especially after Dvei Leah, Tzemach Tzedek's mother had given her life for her father. So the Alter Rebbe wanted to give the Tzemach Tzedek a gift. What was the gift? A certain amount of Torah knowledge. Tzemach Tzedek rejected it. You gaita matzasi. One has to exert themselves, effort to study Torah. You don't take it as a gift. It was that Tzemach Tzedek years later said he regretted. Because Torah is aruchem eretz midar achavim miniyam. The Torah is endless. As much as he was taken, he could have always used the effort to go further in Torah. So what reminded me that Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka is saying, as you're given something, you take it. You don't start. We're given tremendous keiches. We're coming from Yud Shvat, Chof Beis Shevat. It's only 12 days after Yud Shvat. Learning the Maimer Basel Legani. What's the theme? Especially these chapters that correspond to these years. Bizbuz aseres, the splurging of the treasures that were concealed forever and ever. Concealed for generations. But when it comes to fighting the battle against the sheker, the falsity of this world, against the shtus, the le'umazeh, the nonsense, the folly of this world, the Eibishter gives us the deepest aseres. The king splurges the aseres for the foot soldiers to win the battle. And as the Rebbe, whenever he would share this, especially Yud Shvat, he says, Megist to Megist. We pour and we pour. The Rebbe is referring to all the chassidus that was published, all the stories told, all the resources given to us. Excuse me. All the aseres given to us, and when you're given, you should take. If you don't take, it's an insult. It's a disgrace. So the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin together have given us tremendous resources. And never think, God forbid, for one moment, just because after Chof Beis Shevat or after Gimel Tammuz, we don't have those resources. On the contrary, we have even more resources now. So that's a bit of the biography, the significance, some stories. And finally, what practical actions should we be doing in honor of this day? So we've discussed already things that Rebbe Befeda spoke about, Yom Haledes, of course, especially for women and girls, things about building a dira no, a beautiful home. Things connected to the 3 mitzvahs that women particularly have, neshek, lighting of Shabbos candles, Yom Tov candles, challah, kashrus, achila v'shtiya, and taras mishpatim. And in general, the gentleness and the nurturing of a woman in the process of bringing Yiddishkeit closer to people. That nurturing ability has the ability to reach into the hearts of people. And the woman has a special touch in that regard. And overall, any additional Torah mitzvahs that we do, Chof Beis Shevat, all in the honor of the Rebbetzin, obviously is all a critical way of honoring that special day. Okay, let us now go to the parsha. So, we're in parsha Mishpatim, which is really a hemshech ve'ela Mishpatim to Yisro. That Eila Mishpatim, that means Meisif ala Rishonim, that just as the laws were given by Har Sinai, so too the Mishpatim, the laws in this parsha are given at Har Sinai. So in that sense, I could say the questions that came in, some of them are still from Yisro, and some connected to Mishpatim as well. So I'm going to combine both of them and talk about a bunch of different questions, select questions, many, many more that came in that I can't address. So overall, let's start with Mishpatim, being that it's the immediate parsha. So what taka is the reason that the laws were put into Mishpatim and not before? So besides for the fact that the Eibishter is giving them piecemeal, so to speak, tafasta maruba le tafasta, that they come in stages. Just to demonstrate a key interesting thing, you learn things from Yisro sometimes. We're going to talk about Yisro and Ermin Acheshach. So as you may know, I'm good friends with President Javier Milei of Argentina. Not a Jewish man, but he reads the parsha every day, literally, and takes lessons. When I was in Israel with him the first time, it was parsha Mishpatim. It was other time, right before other. Well, it was actually other Shechina and Atzmus. I remember sharing with him Shechina and Atzmus Mar B'Simcha. And he told me a lesson he learned from parsha Mishpatim. And it was his own thought. He was just had become president. It was the first year he was president. And he was making radical changes, especially economically and so on, to help Argentina. And he said that before he left Israel, he had submitted to the Congress, I think he says 600 changes, modifications to the laws. And he felt that he had the momentum and he would succeed, and it seemed like everything was lined up. He says, but once I left, you can imagine the opposition began to undermine. And it's not a good day for today because they're not ratifying them. But then I read, and I was not feeling positive about it because I felt I failed. Then I'm reading parsha Mishpatim and I asked myself the question, why didn't Eibishter give all the laws together in parsha Yisro by Mount Bahar Sinai? Or why aren't they all told together? He said he understood the reason. Because tafasta merubale tafasta. He didn't use that expression. He said because you have to do things gradually. 600 laws were too many. I should have submitted the easier ones. Get them to pass those. Then send them more. That's what I learned from Mishpatim. You have to do it in stages. Man came to a hayrah b'chaim from the parsha. But another thing, which I shared with him and I'm sharing now here, Ve'ela Mishpatim, you know, why does it say Mishpatim? Because we know in Torah, mitzvahs can be called by 3 names. There's Eidus, there's Mishpatim, Eidus, and Chukim. What's the difference? Mishpatim are the rational laws, the laws that make sense. Meaning what makes sense? That even if we didn't have the Torah, we also would have done it. Like the Gemara says, that if either we didn't have the Torah, and the Rebbe Rashab asked Chaz v'Shalom, we would learn tznius from a cat. Leisignev, not to steal. There's a lot of laws that are rational laws that a normal society would come to. Eidus are commemorative laws. Shabbos, Yom Tov. They make sense, but they're more commemorative. It's not a rational moral law. And Chukim are the super rational laws, like Pora Aduma is the classic. Zeis Chuka Sater. Ve'ela Mishpatim is saying that even the rational laws have to come from Sinai. Like the Rebbe explains, why do the 10 Commandments begin with Anochi Hashem Elokecho? Everyone understands Leisignev, Leisirzach. Mele Shabbos, or especially things like Chukim. So you need Anochi Hashem, you need Hashem. Only Hashem can give us such laws. But laws, the simple laws, everyone can come to. Nah. If you want them to be absolute and not arbitrary, everything has to be based on Sinai. Mishpatim, the rational laws, they come from Sinai, then they're unwavering. And the Rebbe often gives the example from Rachmana litzlan, Yamach Shemam, the Nazis. They were rational people, philosophers and doctors and lawyers and scientists. And yet look what happened. They were able to use their rationale to find ways to kill people, innocent people. Because there's no Anochi Hashem Elokecho. You start playing God. You can play with mitzvahs like Leisirzach. You can decide, you know what? I decide who is life and death. Anochi Hashem Elokecho gives you the assurance, the absolute assurance. It's not about you. You're doing because God said so. God said, do not touch another person. Because once you go with your own seichel, you can always find excuses and exceptions and so on. And how far you can wander. So El Shpotim is coming to add not just another set of laws, but that even the rational laws. Basically, that even seichel also comes from L'mayla Miseichel. There are many lessons from that. I once wrote an article, is logic logical? Who makes logic logical? Once had the Eibishter created logic, it became logical. But the foundation of everything are axioms, muscolas and shenis. Even in science today, Gödel in mathematics, Heisenberg in quantum mechanics, Karl Popper in the general the theory, the philosopher. They all talk about that all ideas have to start with some axioms that are not necessarily rational. They're not irrational, but they're super rational. And those are absolute, unwavering foundations in life. We all need them. Then the seichel works well and make sure it's a reality check that makes sure that the seichel follows guidelines that are not based purely on logic, because with seichel you can go any direction, you can find excuses, you can find exceptions, you can find all kinds of explanations, justifications, as we see people do. Bias and prejudice will blind even the eyes of the wise. The Torah calls them wise. So the theme of Matan Torah continues when it permeates not just the laws that only God can give, but also laws that are mislabish and seichel. In other words, basically in the language of Chassidus, that l'mayla mishtalshelus, Anochi Hashem Elokecho permeates also ishtalshelus, also the structure of the aseres of Chochma, Bina, Das, and so on. Why was the Torah given on Mount Sinai and not on Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount, someone asks. If the whole idea of creation is that God's essence should be revealed in the physical world via our study of Torah and performance of mitzvahs, and the place where that revelation is most prominent is the Beis HaMikdash, Shechanti B'Seicham, where God resides, then why was the Torah given and revealed at Mount Sinai and not on the mountain where the Beis HaMikdash was? So it's a very good question. A similar question is asked, not mamish like that, but similar question. Why was it given in a desert in the first place? Why not in a beautiful city? So the Medrash gives a bunch of answers. One of them is that it's a mokum hefker, it's a place, no man's land. The Eibishter didn't want people to come claim royalties that you gave it in my city, so we'd get 10% every time there's a Torah class, for example. To show that Torah belongs to everybody. Some say another reason in Medrash because the desert reminds us of emptiness. You have to empty yourself. The bittul needed. Lo yoshev adam sham. It's higher than that. It's a place where it's not a civilized place. It's a place where you have to be complete bittul to receive. Nafshi ka'ofer la'kel tiyeh psach libe b'seiresecha. When your nefesh like offer, like the dust, just like earth, like the sand in the desert, dry, then psach libe b'seiresecha. Your heart gets open to Torah. And many other reasons. So you could apply the same explanation. The same thing, the Mishkan was also in the desert. Because that's the first place you begin. You begin in a tough, difficult environment, naaseh akrav, an arid, difficult desert. Eres siyah v'oyif, a dry and arid and thirsty land. That's where it begins. Later, the Beis HaMikdash will be built on Har Moriah, which is in a city, in Yerushalayim, in the holiest city. So you could say that you first need a preparation in a difficult place. And interestingly, there it doesn't leave a permanent effect. Like we discussed last week, Har Sinai and the Mishkan, there's nothing holy in that place where those events happen. Har Moriah, once they build the Beis HaMikdash, Kedusha le'zazim imkema, that Kedusha permeated and saturated. And even today, when there's no Beis HaMikdash, you're not allowed to walk on the Har HaBayis. In a way, the same reason that before Matan Torah come the Ovis. The Ovis brought Kedusha Ruchnius into this world, but they didn't transform the very physical world, but you needed to pave the way. So they did it in a world that was a much more callous world. Matan Torah actually transformed the world. So in other words, you begin in a tougher situation, and then once you pave the way and you refine the environment, it's like in the beginning when a student begins to study, the first thing you have to break the resistance. And there may be other explanations as well. If anybody wants to weigh in, please share, and I'll be happy to share that in future programs. Next question. Since the patriarchs studied and kept the entire Torah, as the Gemara says, what was unique about Matan Torah? So continuing this discussion, if the Ovis already kept the entire Torah, what was the chiddush of giving the Torah at Har Sinai? If they kept the Torah, it means that the Torah information was already available in the world. Why would we have to be given to the world again? So here too, going back, the Oves, it says, did it in spiritual ways. Yes, they did it on earth, and they paved the way, but they didn't. It was not mitzvah v'aser. They were not commanded to do it. It was like educational years where you're not commanded to, but it's critical in preparing yourself and preparing your children. Now that you're ready, now the Eibishter comes, V'yered Hashem al Har Sinai, the bitl ha'gzeira, bein alyenim v'tachtenim, that now we can go and transform the world. But before we transform, first you have to be ready for it. So the Ovis prepared the ground. It's like you date. First you soften the resistance. Some of the Mittler Rebbe has long maamoros in Teres Chaim where he talks about Sefer HaYoshar, Sefer Bereshis, is Agdama. Where does Avedus Hashem really begin? Tzis Mitzrayim, Matan Torah, and so on, the Mishkan. But the first Sefer is the most important because it lays the ground. Without a proper chinuch, you can start bar mitzvah without knowing anything, without training. So in a sense, it's the training. But let's not dismiss the training. The training is breaking through, pioneering. Avram came in a pagan world, but he pioneered, he built a family. Had the Eibishter given the Torah, let's say in the beginning, there would have been no family that would have embraced it yet. Adam Achava, yes, but they wouldn't. They didn't. They were even achet tzadas. The Eibishter wanted first that people build a family, which Avram did. Build a community. So now I have someone to work with. Now I'll give you my best. It's like in many ways you may like experiment. I'll give a very secular example. Before you buy a business, you work in it for a while, or you put some of your people to work there just to get a sense what it's like a training. And then once I see this is going to work, now I'm all in. So in that sense, the Ovis prepared the world. So there are two things. They're prepared. They brought everything but Ruchnius. The Ruchnius didn't permeate the Gashmius yet, except for Bris Milah. You need one thing that would be the beginning of transforming the material world. And everything they did was Beruchnius. Like in some maamoros it says, Beruchnius v'lei begashmius. So both things, very spiritual and many ways higher than we even, because Ovis Heinen and Markova. But Matan Torah transformed and gave us the power to transform the world. That's why Mishkan, the Ovis never built a Mishkan. Like he explains in Basaligani, that's the Deir Hashvi of Moshe Rabbeinu. Now we could take the physical world and make a Mishkan v'shachanti b'sech. What is the significance of naaseh v'nishma? And what is the logic of committing to something before hearing what you're committing to? How does it make logical sense for us to say we'll follow all the Torah laws before we were specifically told what these laws entail? So the Gemara actually says, one of the philosophers, that Apikusim in Masechta Shabbos asks, Pziza, what kind of nation is this? A Russian nation that just signs a contract without even reading it? You know any Jew that would do such a thing today? So what's this naaseh v'nishma? We talk about such a high thing that because b'shal shigdim yisol naaseh v'nisha, the malachim came and they kishu lehem shnei ksarim, they gave them 2 crowns, they weaved crowns for them. What's the achievement of this? So a few things. Naaseh v'nishma is Kabbalah sale, basically. Kabbalah sale is the first thing you need. Kablu malchusei, then kablu gzeresai. When the Jews said to the Eibishter, we're ready to hear your laws, he says, first accept me. It's a tremendous lesson in life, let's say in marriage. It's not just you follow a grocery list of to-dos. You love someone, then you'll automatically do what they ask you to do. If you don't love someone, yes, you may go through the checklist and get it done, but it's not, I want a commitment. The Eibishter said, I want a commitment from you. That's the naaseh. It's a commitment. And what about the fact, however, they didn't even know how do you commit to something you don't know, but they did know. We talked about the Ovis. They had been dating Kavyochel Hashem for generations. Avram knew the Hashem. Yitzchak knew Hashem. Yaakov knew. The Shvatim knew. Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah knew. It's 7 generations they were ready, so to speak, having a relationship with Hashem. Now Hashem says, now I'm ready for marriage. Yem Chasanos is at Matan Torah. You're ready for marriage. So for them to say, well, we have to still see, what do you want exactly? No, there comes a point of commitment. Now's the time. You've already seen everything you have to see. So naaseh v'nishma means commitment. Does someone say commitment before anything? No, but you had your time of getting to know each other. And you see it in life in general. Commitment is the key. You need more time to study, so study. But by the Yidden, they already had 7 generations. So Matan Torah comes, naaseh v'nishma. But it doesn't say naaseh only. It says naaseh v'nishma. Then they come and listen and study, and you need both. Is there a connection between the 10 commandments, aseres hadibros, and the 10 utterances, asorah maamoros, with which the world was created? The answer is absolutely yes. Remember, the world was created b'shvil Yisro, b'shvil atera, bereishis, beis reishis. And that's how it works. So the Eibishter created 10 maamoros, asorah maamoros nivrei elam. Al Tanai, like we know, is a Tanai that he said, that the Yidden would receive the Torah, or if not, he destroys the world. Because the whole asorah maamoros is dependent on aseres hadibros, which of course encompass all of the Torah. And that's why 10-10. And they also correspond to the 10 spheres, as the Pardes, the Ramak explains. the structure of 10. So it starts from the aseres, then it comes the asorah hadibros, which is in Torah, which in turn guide the asorah maamoros, how to use the world to turn it into a chefetz shekdusha, al pi the aseres maamoros, al pi the aseres hadibros. Why was Yisro's acknowledgment necessary before the giving of the Torah? We spoke about this last week. Because Yisro was Yisro ne'er min ha'cheshech. That's one of the reasons he's called Yisro. To transform the world, you need the world itself. Minei be'aba lishde be'narge. The wood of the tree is needed to cut down the tree. That's called ishapche. So when Yisro came and said, Ati Yadaiti, Kiavaya, that your God is greater than all others, that was a recognition that the world was ready to receive the Torah, because the Torah wasn't just given to the Yidden, it was given to the whole world. That's why it says by Matan Torah the whole world became silent. Eretz Yora v'Shakota, the bird did not tziftzef, tzipor le tziftzef. Everything was quiet. So Yisro was a critical step in that process. It creates a credibility that comes from within the system itself. Why did we spoke about it more at length last week, so I'm not going to elaborate. Why did Yisro have 7 names? Someone asks, is there a source that says the reason Yisro had 7 names is because he had 7 daughters, and each time he married one off, he went bankrupt and had to change his name and move to a new city to avoid creditors? Or someone just making a joke by saying this? The latter is true. It's one of the jokes they say. The answer is, Rashi says each name represented something. You can look at Rashi, gives all the names, Yisro, Yeser, and all the different names, based on Midrashim. Why Dafki Yisro? So firstly, Yisro is not the only one, but remember, Yisro was someone who was a kohen, he was a minister, if you wish, or a guru of every type of philosophy and every avodah zarah, every form of idolatry. That's part of the transformation, that a person like that came from the very world that the Torah comes to transform. So perhaps you can say that's why he had all these names, because each name represented a different feature, a different quality. Some of them are qualities positive, some of them are about the transformation. Okay. And finally, why did the altar have a ramp and not steps? The end of parsha Yisro, it says clearly, it should not have steps. So I'm not sure why you're asking the question. The pasuk itself says so, for tznius reasons. Because when a person walks on steps, the kohanim had robes, it can expose something and be not so modest. And when you're walking to the mizbeach, the altar, you have to be as modest as you can. But obviously, if you go deeper, you could ask, what is modesty exactly? Well, modesty is Hashem Elokecho. Walk modestly with dignity before your God. There's an element of dignity. But if you think deeper, steps are important because steps is an elevation. You go one level to the next. But a ramp, in a way, has a different type of elevating. It's not one step leads to the next. It's constantly, it's one flow. And you start to see in a ramp, today they use ramps for people who cannot walk all the steps, or people going with their carriage or something like that. So a ramp has more of a consistency. If you think in Gedusha, even though there is a discussion, Chassidus talks about ad va'ad b'chlal, ad v'lo ad b'chlal, which means there are levels in the finite structure where one level leads you to the next level. And there are times where one level you need a leap to go to the next level. So in a way, you really want is integration. And a ramp is more ardazdik, more integration. And there are more explanations when you go deeper into it, but we'll suffice with that. Since we're already talking about Matan Torah, the Gilui of Matan Torah, so there were some still questions were asked about Hashem himself. Last week we spoke about, can you describe God? So I'm going to, let me see here, with the time that's left, I just want to make sure I have enough time to cover everything. Okay, I'll try to go a little quicker here. So someone asked, can we compel God to learn Torah? Talking about Matan Torah. So we know there's an expression, When you sit and learn Torah, the Eibishter sits and learns Torah across you, so to speak. So someone asks, if it says that when we learn Torah, Hashem learns along with us, does that give us power to control Hashem's actions? If we decided to learn a random page of Mishnah or Chumash, does that force Hashem to learn that Mishnah or Chumash with us, even if that wasn't in his plans for that day? Could that be a reason that Rebbe told us to learn about the Beis Hamikdash and Mashiach? Because if Hashem has to learn it with us, it will occupy his mind with these concepts of Mashiach, and maybe that can make him send Mashiach faster because it's on his mind. So I would say half of what you're saying is correct. Why do you have to say forcing, compel? Hashem loves his Torah. It's Shashuim Lefonov. It's called his inner delight. Shashuim Melech Batzmusei. You don't have to force God to learn Torah. Yes, Hashem responds. Hashem Tzilcha. It says the Maggid teaches Hashem is your shadow, meaning that Dama Shalamayla is Mimach. So the teaches know that which is above comes from you. That Hashem, like a shadow, will follow your actions. You do a mitzvah, Hashem will respond. Midah keneged midah. Same here. Hashem loves learning Torah. You don't have to convince him. You don't have to compel him. But yes, you have the power to get him active involved in that because he sees you're learning. Then of course he's going to come to learn. And yes, you could say that's true also when we learn about Mashiach and Beis Hamikdash. That in a way engages Hashem to be engaged with that, and when it's on your mind, so to speak. Now, of course, Hashem, everything is on his mind all the time. But we're talking about manifesting. He said, Ye'erdano. Not just dasel yodua, that God knows, and that everything is known to God. You want God yodeya, you should be involved and engaged with us. And that dependent on our avodah. Which leads us to the next question. How can we explain the paradox that Hashem is both infinitely inaccessible and simultaneously infinitely accessible? I'm not sure if you're referring to the L'mayla Mayla Aden Ketz, L'mata Mata Aden Tachlis of Ein Sof that we learned about in this year's chapter 16 in Bas Legani. But the idea is absolutely the case. Yes, the Eibishter created it manifested in a dimension called Mamala Kalalmin, which is accessible, divine, accessible to us. Aseres and Kalim. Sevav Kalalmin is a transcendent element. And then there's Anochi Hashem Elokecho, Anochi, the Etzem Atzmus, that unites the transcendent and the immanent. Unites Das Elyon and Das Tachten. Yichud Elah and Yichud Tata. So God is not more accessible than he is inaccessible. Because he's neither of them. Just as he has the power of the infinite, he has the power of the finite. And that's how they come together. But we have to do our part. First, we do work our avodah b'tam v'das, ava al pitam v'das, we're mamala kalaman. Then the transcendent, whether Kabbalah Seil or Yegiya or Mesidus Nefesh, and then joining them together, like we spoke before, the Maila, the infinite within the finite. And then you have both dimensions together. The Helam and the Gilul. The Maila Maila Aden Ketz and the Mata Mata Aden Tachlis. Okay. What's the difference between Shechina and Atzmus? So you have the answer. Atzmus is the highest level. Shechina is mamala kalam. Shechenus mislabeshes. The Rebbe explains in the first Maimer Bas Legani Tov Aleph from all the Rabbeim what Shechina means. Ika Shechina b'tachtonim meisa. Generally refers to Malchus, but Shechina could also go on. The Kav, as the Rebbe brings in. The Shechina is generally the divine as it manifests. And Atzmus is the divine, not only how it not manifests, how beyond manifestation, beyond manifestation. There's more questions on this, but I'm going to move right now on. I want to talk about the Siyum Rambam. Why did the Rebbe institute the daily learning of Rambam? So, and what is the history behind it? It was Achen Shapesach Tovshimem Daled, where the Rebbe instituted it. And he gave, the main reason was Achdus. The Rambam is Ma'achad Kol HaTeira Kula, because he has all parts of Torah, even Hilchos of the Mashiach, even things that are from the time of the Beis Hamikdash. And the Rambam talks about bringing together Kol HaTeira Kula. And when Ali Eden learn it together, is the Achdus of Eden. So the Achdus of Eden, the Achdus of Torah, all to speed up the Geula, which is dependent on this unity. The Sikh is already printed from that Achron Shal Pesach. The Rebbe edited it. And then became, from there, the Rebbe set up the 3 different structures, 3 chapters a day and finishing it once a year approximately, 1 chapter a day finishing it every 3 years approximately, and Sefer HaMitzvahs corresponding to the 3 chapters a day, that Sefer HaMitzvahs. The mitzvahs, not the entire halacha, is the mitzvahs. The most important thing we take away from that is the learning of Rambam. So if you haven't yet begun, it's a good opportunity. Now they just began the new Seder, the new year, the new cycle. So now's a good time to begin in one of the 3 ways. But there's a few more things I want to talk about, so I am leaving certain things that I will move on to the next. Right now, as we speak, there is something going on called the Super Bowl. The most watched television event, the Super Bowl. Football game. If you don't know, like the Rebbe would say by Fabrengens, Tovei Alecha Bracha. So I had a few questions I want to address since it's timely. So we'll do that now in the last few classes, the last few questions I'm going to address. How can I stop my husband from watching the Super Bowl? Well, by now, if you're listening to this program, the Super Bowl may be over already or coming to an end. But regardless, since the question came in, let me read the full question. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, every year my husband insists on watching the Super Bowl on his computer and he refuses to accept that the Torah explicitly forbids it. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein writes in Igros Mesha, here's with a source, Yededeya 4:11 and Even Ezer 4:61, that the prohibition of Moshe Leitzim extends to contemporary spectator sports, especially violent ones like football, viewing it as involving letzonis, bittul Torah, and promotion of violence. 2 years ago, I invited friends to have a drum circle in our house, and I hoped we would be so loud that my husband wouldn't be able to do the averah of watching the football game. And my husband was so angry at me, he embarrassed and humiliated me in front of my friends by calling me a witch and telling me to fly away on my broomstick. Last year, I tried a different strategy. I secretly put... I don't even know if I could read this. I'll read it. I secretly put laxatives in his lunch to force him to have an upset stomach and keep running to the bathroom so he wouldn't be able to watch the game. But somehow he was able to watch it on his phone in the bathroom. The rest of the year, my husband is a good husband and father, but by the Super Bowl, he becomes an animal. It's as if he's possessed by a dibuk and he becomes unreasonable and won't listen to me or to Agdelim that paskin watching violent sports is against the Torah. I don't know what else I can do to stop the averah from occurring in my vicinity. Please advise. Thank you. Well, my advice you may not like. My advice is to leave your husband alone. Choose your battles. I'm not defending it. I'm not saying it's the holiest thing to do. But you have to choose your battles. Your husband's a good husband overall. I would not make a big focus on this. Everybody has their things. In Tanya chapter 30, which I just finished teaching, he talks about looking at yourself. Are you perfect? And I'm not here to accuse you of anything. But look at yourself, work on yourself. You want to say an extra kapitel Tehillim for your husband? Do so quietly without letting him know. But with approach like aggressive approach, you're not going to get very far. You're just going to create more rifts. And shalom bayis is very important. I don't know if I would go on aseres nefesh. It doesn't say anywhere that it's yareg val yaver, that you have to die before watching the Super Bowl. Again, I'm not condoning it. I'm just saying that. Secondly, with love, you get much better places. Instead of all these options that you did, I would have probably found a way and say, I want to have a conversation with you. He may say, not now. Fine, so have a loving conversation after the Super Bowl. Do something with love, something more romantic, something that will bring him closer to you. Not create confrontation. It's just not the way to go. And to throw in front of him that says this halacha, that halacha, usually not the way to do things. That's my advice. I think I spoke about it in previous years, but that's what I'd like to say now. Another person asks, who should we root for in the Super Bowl? Or better put, should we root for any team? So Ron writes, the New England Patriots or the Seattle Seahawks. A patriot is someone loyal to his country, but a country is a physical structure. Even though Hashem creates and energizes our physical structures, He does so through the energy of mamala kalaman. A seahawk is an aquatic bird, similar to an eagle, and as a bird it represents a more transcendent energy of sevav kalaman. And of course the eagle represents Mashiach, so perhaps we should root for the Seahawks. So I'm glad that you're seeing in this Super Bowl, you're seeing Ruchnis Dika levels, mamala kalaman and sevav kalaman. I guess everything can be a lesson in life if it actually adds in your Shemayim and your Avodah, by all means. About rooting for the winner, who really cares? What difference does it make? I would root for the Avodah Hashem that you learn from it. If you take and learn the Avodah Hashem, may even cause you not have to even watch the game in the first place. You got your lesson already. You don't need to watch the game. Who cares who wins? Mamala Kalaman has its milas. Sevav Kalaman has its milas. And that's how we have to look at it. Like the Rebbe in Shmini Tavshin Mem gave the lesson from soccer, which you could also use for football. 2 teams, Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tev, Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Abamis. Both are given the same amount of players on each team. Zelu Uma, Ze'os Elikim. And the goal is to get the ball into the other side's goalposts. That's what the Rebbe said. What is that goal? The ball? The ball represents the earth. Nefesh Elikis should get it into the point where you win over the Nefesh Abamis. The Nefesh Abamis wants to accomplish the opposite, but that's the goal. Who's the winner in this case? Mamala and Sevav both have their milas. I would look at it as a lesson of Avodas Hashem, and that's the whole reason maybe it exists on earth, because it's going to be hard to convince people to think about Nefesh Elikis, Nefesh Abamis. So you give it a moshel, an example that, like he said in the Maimer Basiligani, the Rebbe gives the example from the Baal Shem Tov, that you dress in the garments and in the language of the world. That way you get the attention of the prince, because without that he doesn't relate to you. So we have to find something, an example in our world. That's how I would look at it. Now there's more to talk about. I actually wanted to talk about more matters. It's just it's late. So I will end with something that's not a positive, but it's in the news, and I've got a lot of questions about it, and I decided, let me just address this. The question that was asked is, what do we learn from the latest obsession with the release of documents of a certain individual's despicable behavior? And everyone knows what I'm talking about. Document, thousands and thousands of pages. All people implicated or not implicated in really decadent, mamish, the worst possible behavior. Unfortunately, a Jew involved in it all. This week, someone writes like this. This week, the government releases many documents related to the investigation of, I don't even want to mention his name, and his wealthy and prominent group of friends. Originally, I thought this group of people were just perverts, but after reading some of the files, it's a lot worse than anyone could imagine. It involves child sacrifices, cannibalism, and despicable and disgusting behavior. It sounds eerily similar to what the Torah describes the idol worshippers of Baal Pe'er and Moloch were doing. You could add Zudem and Gomorrah also. Is it possible the cult of Baal Pe'er and Moloch still exists today? Didn't Eliyahu Novi destroy the Baal Pe'er? Is this the last example of pure evil that must be destroyed before Mashiach can come? So without going into the evil, let me just say this. Yes, when a thing like this happens, everything is a lesson in life. That's why I chose to talk about it. The lesson is the world, unfortunately, is sometimes consumed with mamashel tach, the sholosh klippos satmeis, in the worst possible way. In the words of the Alter Rebbe in Tanyet, Perek Lamed Vov, mole klippos v'sitra achre, chesher kofle mechupel, l'shoyim gevrim bei, and a place where aniva avsied. What does it ultimately come to? Selfishness. Pleasure in the worst possible way, in the lowest possible way. And with what? In the area where the Eibishter gave the Koyach Ein Sof, the power to give birth. So the Koyach Ein Sof, when it's used, like Ein L'mayla Me'eneg, Ein L'mata Menega. So sexuality, and it's used in a holy and sacred way, it's the greatest force. You mamish become like godlike, giving birth, Koyach Ein Sof, to bring life into this world. Use the opposite, look at the destruction it can create. So that's the first lesson, to realize what kind of power, when it's abused, what happens. Secondly, when you talk about Yidden, a Yid can be at the highest level, and Rahman al-Islam, if he doesn't use his keiches, can be the lowest of the lowest. And third, the obsession of the world with it. Because even if most people are not behaving that way, the obsession, it's an obsession. Obviously, those that are guilty have to be prosecuted properly and so on. But there's an obsession, almost a type of voyeurism. People are, I don't want to say enjoying, but yes, a certain titillation that takes place that is also very, very disturbing. So for a Yid and a Chassid, how you look at it, if you're aware of it, if you're not aware, again, Tov Elecha Bracha, if you're aware, we have to look at it that this is part of the Cheshach Kafel Mechupel. And yes, at the end of Golus, the Rebbe said, Yizbaru v'yislabna advarim, things are going to come out clearly. So the mere revelation, it's not being done in secret anymore. The people were arrested. People, their consequences, is the last gasps of Ashol Klipsat Meis of this world. And when that's finally eliminated, and it's been eliminated, but now when we reveal its elimination, we will be zeichet to the Gula Amitis Vashlema. It's very distasteful to talk about these things. I would rather have ended with the Super Bowl, but being that it's part of the news, things we can learn from it. And so we have to use and create, the headline should be, as much as the obsession with all this exposés, the headline should be that we've transformed the world and we've shown how this holy power can be used to bring godliness into this world, the koyach ha'ensof into this elam hazeh agashmi, and make a dira b'tachtenim through your futzamay nesecha chutza, as the Baal Shem Tov heard from Mashiach, osimar do malka Mashiach. This has been my life, Chassidus Applied. We're here every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m., chassidusapplied.com. Everyone have a good tavach, an uplifting and meaningful Chof Beis Shevat, and may that give us kayach to finish the job of the Deir Hashvi, v'shachanti b'seicham, the Gula Hamitis v'ashlema, and be reunited with the Rebbe and the Rebbetzin, all the Rabbeim, and all the Chassidim, and all people, good people from the beginning of time. Be well.